we're recording and
So my name is Scott Petrie, and I'm a high school teacher in California, in the lovely Los Angeles Unified School District. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about helping adolescents, the teenagers. Really, I'm sharing work that I've done with my high school students. If you're a college professor and you're teaching a methods class, you can slightly tweak this stuff for your older students. But as you can tell from the chart on this slide, that listening skills are the #2 skill in demand from hiring professionals. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. I will say, and I should put this in the chat, I have a bit.ly, so you can steal these slides or use them. Let me figure out how to do that. Chat, boom, boom, boom. And feel free to make a copy and chop them up and steal anything that might help you in your professional practice. Today, I'm going to try and do this lightning sprint through 6 different things. We'll cover a little bit about the research. I'm going to share some examples of interviews or oral histories that I've done with my students. I'm going to talk about something I like to call the first person podcast, which can replace a history paper. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about shorter listening tasks with scaffolds, longer listening tasks, reducing the scaffolds, and then how to use listening data if you track this stuff with a platform like Listenwise, which is one of my favorites. So, just some research. I found this infographic, and the biggest thing that I know as a high school teacher is my students struggle with pronunciation. And the nice thing about using the audio, especially if it's accompanied with a transcript, is it increases their reading accuracy and it enables them to pronounce the words like dilemma or paradigm. I love hearing a kid talk about the new paradigm of the Cold War. And usually, as your teacher, it kind of gets your spidey sense going that if a kid's mispronouncing the word, they probably don't understand the word. So audio promotes literacy. As educators, that 85% of what we learn by listening. This is my pitch for this whole thing about teaching listening in schools is, listening is the thing we do most all day long, but we don't teach kids how to listen. And so I'm going to get into that. But one of my favorite tasks my favorite stats here is that students can listen and comprehend 2 grade levels above their reading level because they're hearing everything pronounced correctly. They're hearing it in the correct context. So using audio, implementing audio into your instructional program, very, very intriguing. There's all this research on what's called the theater of the mind, where if a student is listening to something and they're hearing the people cross the Pettus Bridge and they're hearing the dogs barking and the police shouting and the fighting happening, they picture themselves there. They close their eyes and they picture themselves there. But when they see the old grainy black and white footage of that, they just can't empathize. They can't put themselves into that video. So using audio, engaging kids in the theater of the mind, all wonderful first steps. And then I put these here. I should say this comes from like a 6-hour workshop that I typically do with my local county of education, and distilling it into 25 minutes is a challenge. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is interviewing. And you'll see here that I've given you a link to this little middle grades article, how to help students make the most of interviews. And then this is one of my favorite things to share with my students. And every year I do the great Thanksgiving listen with my students. And Steve Inskeep from NPR does this little nice short video on how to interview people. And that is a really powerful video. It's really good to ground kids and teach them writing their interview questions and how to listen for people in their oral history projects. So, whoops, I'm sorry, Steve. I don't want to hear you today. So this is an example of my wonderful daughter, Sarah, who is interviewing her grandmother as part of the Great Thanksgiving Listen. And the reason I include it is because my students, high school students in particular, need to see what the final project looks like. You know, you get 500 questions from them. How many points is this worth? How many pages does it have to be? How many minutes should it be? They just want all the specifics. And I kind of hate doing that, because what I find is if you're as vague as possible with your instructions, a lot of people will shoot past and exceed your expectations. So, there is this contest from NPR and StoryCorps every year called the Great Thanksgiving Listen. And I want to click on it right there. Okay. And so this takes you to the website. There's all sorts of resources here. And this is a simple task where the student is encouraged to interview the oldest person at their Thanksgiving table. And I just modified it slightly, and I have them interview that person about the historical impacts, the historical events that have impacted their life. And so I take them through a process where they write 20 questions. And here's a link to that lesson plan specifically. They write an interview. Let's see, let's look at it. So I give them all sorts of resources. I should say we're a one-to-one school. We've used the Google Classroom. Now we're using Schoology, but all of our students have Chromebooks, so it's very easy for them to do this. And so what I do is I break it down into parts, and I grade each part, because what I found is if I don't give them little tiny tasks that are can be discreetly done in 1 or 2 class periods, if I just give them a week to do something, barely anybody turns it in. But if every day they have to turn something in, they are much more successful on a project like this. So I have them create a timeline of the life of the interview subject. I have them write out 20 questions that they're going to ask. I have them conduct the interview and record it. I have them type a transcript of the interview, which is very important, especially for the ones that are in Spanish that I can't read or listen to or understand. And then they try and corroborate some facts from their interview with their history book. And then lastly, they do a reflection about this. And every year, I started off having these be like an extra credit project, and then I rolled it out to, I think everybody can do it. And I loved this student who learned from his grandmother that one of his relatives was in the Mexican Revolution. And this student was just so proud to learn this. And every year when I do this, I get thank yous from the parents that say, you know, this is the first time my teenager has talked to me in 6 months. And so they always really like it. It's always a highlight of my fall semester. And I've also incorporated what I call the 9/11 interview, where a lot of my students now, they were born after 9/11. And so they know very little about it. But what I remember is my own experience from 9/11. And so I've had them interview a parent or a grandparent about where were you when 9/11 happened. And I still have the same type of lesson plan format. I have some samples of student work here. Again, these are powerful things to do at the very beginning of the year, where I tell my students that they're going to be creating and interpreting history. And one of the ways historians do that is by listening to interviews of people who were there at the scene when history happened. So lastly, I'm sure you've seen or heard many of these Vietnam veteran interviews. This is always a great assignment to do near Veterans Day or Memorial Day. You can see the picture on the left. I had a wonderful man who used to be a TA at my school, Walt Bertelson, who had been through Vietnam, and he would come back every year and talk to the kids about his experiences. And they loved it because they knew Mr. B, because they saw him around school. But then to hear him and his lived experiences in Vietnam is very powerful to students. And again, really brings together the school community. And then asking the students to go out and do Vietnam veteran interviews is not that difficult because there's so many veteran agencies out there, local veterans associations that you can reach out to. And you don't have to limit, because I'm a high school teacher and I teach Vietnam, I usually focus it on that. But now there's so many returning Iraq War veterans and veterans from all other conflicts, is you can really broaden this topic and just get kids talking to people who have lived through this experience is powerful. And what I always remind them is that there will be something in your interview where grandma says, and that was the last time I saw Herb, and I really liked Herb. And a good interviewer that's listening says, whoa, wait a second, grandma, tell me more about Herb. Does grandpa know about him? But what I found with my students is they just rush to the next question on their list. So really, they need practice doing these recordings. They need practice doing interviews, because for the students, from the students' perspective, when they're just starting off, their goal is to get through all 20 questions. And I tell them that sometimes you might only get through 5 questions because the person might have great stories and you get caught up asking them those stories. It's okay to abandon your questions. And then this is just an example of how you can do local history. A couple of years ago, when we had the big wildfires in California, my buddy Ryan O'Donnell and I, Ryan's a big podcaster, you might know him from his Check That Out podcast, and we decided that we were going to have kids do oral histories of people who had been evacuated from California wildfires, because it was happening to my students in Southern California, it was happening to his students up in Northern California. Really, the whole West was on fire. And so talking to these people about where did you go, how did the government help you, was very powerful for my students. And I had kids who interviewed firefighters. I had a kid who interviewed Airbnb, because for a time Airbnb was offering free housing to people who were displaced. This was a really powerful project, and it was supported through an organization called Q that gave us a grant to buy the microphones and all that. All right, moving on. I like to do I used to do a first-person historical research paper. And this is kind of like a little bit of historical fiction and a little bit of nonfiction mixed together. So here's the lesson plan. Basically, I found this wonderful woman. I hope the link is still good. Yeah. And she talks about the first person research paper and how to make it so that, we know a lot of kids plagiarize in junior high and high school, but if you make it so that they have to turn the writing from the third person academic into the first person personal, they're actually doing a lot of the heavy lifting and the literary skills and learning how to be better writers. So I assigned my students first-person podcasts about World War I. They had to research a one person, they had to find out about their life story, and they had to turn it into, I think, a 3 to 5 minute podcast. And I'm going to show you one, whoops, back up, Petrie. I want to show you the format that we used, because here the biggest tools right here are these BBC audio sound effects. The British Broadcasting Company has given away all their sound effects. They're on this website, so you can add World War I sound effects to your podcast. Also, where did you go? Also, there's another thing called the ambient mixer. that talks about how, that has cityscapes and soundscapes. And that's what I wanted to share with you next. Why am I not seeing it? Where did you go? The Soundscape City Ambient Mixer is a great resource where your kids can find old soundscapes of what was it like in battle, what's it like in the city in the rain. These are just wonderful resources that kind of fire up their imagination and make their podcasts more accessible. And so I know I don't have that much time, but I wanted to play one of these for you. And I just realized that in order to do that, I have to share my sound.
Put me in. I'm tired of this, Woodrow. You cannot sign that bill. It would start madness, I told him. It was the year 1917, the year the
Can you
espionage
guys hear
act
that
was enforced
okay?
in
Give me a
America.
thumbs up or
The use
something
of the
in the
current
chat.
World War America decided to join. Woodrow sighed, putting his pen down. I can't, Mitchell. The Central Powers aren't an easy enemy. We need to ensure the leverage America has in the war. If any document were to reach German lines, informing them of our strategic plans, we're done for. We cannot afford to lose this war. I remember him putting his elbows on the desk and pinching the bridge of his nose as if he were stressed. Disbelief crossed my mind. The leader of our country is allowing people to be imprisoned and deported. Most were American citizens. This is unbelievable. This isn't right, Woodrow, and you know it, I told him. This is a violation of our First Amendment. What good are we as leaders of this country if not to enforce these amendments? You are going to accept it, he threatened, tapping his pen on the desk, as if he was debating to say something. Or you'll be asked to step down from your position as District Attorney General, or be forcefully removed.
So I don't know if this conversation really happened between Woodrow Wilson and Palmer, but that student does a great job dramatizing it. And the great part of these assignments are you can use what I call a tag format where the students have to listen to and write a review or a comment on each person's podcast. And so this is a great way to sort of jigsaw through the content and get your students to listen to each other. There's a lot of social capital here because the students who have the best podcasts, you see them, they have 40, 50, 60, 80 shares, and 80 people have listened to their content. And it's almost like the social media rat race here. Who can get the most listens and likes and follows? It certainly makes the boring history content that you normally have to get through a pleasure to jigsaw through. All right. So here, this is an article I wrote a couple years ago for the Getting Smarter blog. You can click on it down there. But one of the most interesting pieces I thought, or kind of jumped out at me, is from the research of Noni Lasau, who says that in order to be successful, high school students are supposed to know or understand 50,000 words. And learning academic vocabulary requires multiple exposures, meaning you have to hear it over and over again, as well as write it, as well as speak it. So this article pretty much sums up the whole presentation in one blog post. If you want to click on that link, you can read that. And then let me move along. So this is from a tool I use called Listenwise. And Listenwise curates audio stories from National Public Radio and aligns it with national history standards. So this is a paid service. You have to pay for it if you're a social studies teacher. You can use their current events for free. But if you're a high school or middle school, or now they're even for elementary school teachers, you have to pay to get the premium versions. And what I like about these is the kids listen to the podcast. It's usually 4 or 5 minutes. And then immediately there's a quiz or discussion board questions that you can assign them. And the nice thing is over time, you see how these things change and you can track your individual students. And what you'll do is you'll get a robust profile of what their listening strengths and weaknesses are. And the best part of this is you show improvement over time. I did 12 of these quizzes in my fall semester. And at the beginning, you saw a lot of these 40%, kids not doing well. But at the end, almost every single kid is getting 100% on these quizzes. And the powerful thing that tells the students is they control their listening. And if they can focus and pay attention to the transcript and some of the other aids and tools, they can improve their listening. It's 100% in their power. So there's just a lot. If you click on this down here, you'll go to their social studies content. When I last checked, they had over 250 quizzes aligned to social studies content. And these are great, especially during distance learning, because I can play it, I can project the transcript on my screen, play it for my students, and then they go off and take the quiz immediately after. And it's a great prelude to a conversation about this topic. And again, students are hearing everything pronounced correctly. And so they're hearing the academic vocabulary the way it is meant to be heard, and what makes it a very sticky lesson. So as your students grow more and more proficient with these smaller listening tasks from Listenwise that are usually range from, I would say, 3 to 7 minutes, you can branch out and you can find longer podcasts. One of my favorite sites is 15-Minute History from the University of Texas at Austin. And they all come with a transcript. They have over 100 of these. They're adjusted to the Texas standards, but I find a lot of the world history content is pretty similar over time. And what I've done here is I like to make a little quiz and have the kids play it on quizzes. A lot of people use Kahoot, but you can see that after they listen to this, they're getting about 56% of the questions right. And what I like about that is I tend to play this game with them where I divide the class into 4 groups. And I say, Group A, you're not allowed to write anything down. Group B, you can take notes, but you have to turn them in to me immediately after the lecture before the quiz. Group C, I like you guys. I'm going to let you take notes and I'm going to let you use them on the quiz. And then Group D, I'm going to print out the transcript for you because I know you guys need help and you can use them on the quiz. And so you can take a pretty good guess that Group A is not going to fare very well on this because we know from listening, even the people who listen to the TV news at night or watch the TV news, they only remember about 20% of that broadcast. So you really need to do a reinforcing school processing thing, and taking notes is great. Turning and talking about what you wrote down, comparing it with a peer, that's also great. On average, I get my people in Group A getting about 7 questions right. Group B gets 9 questions right. And of course, Group D gets 11 out of the 15 questions right. So if you do this at the beginning of the year, it totally ends the question you get that's, Mister, should we be taking notes on this? Mister, should we be writing this down? It depends. Do you want to get a 75% or do you want to get a 45% on the next quiz? This really puts it in a concrete fashion, the value of taking notes for these young people. So later on in the slides, I have a video from a listening expert named Julian Treasure, and he talks about using different filters. And so a lot of times if you tell your students, for this task, you're going to be listening precisely. I want you to be able to find the details. I want you to be able to retell the story. I want you to be able to sequence events. If they focus and practice on that, they get better at that skill. If you're just talking about strategic listening or critical listening, they're different levers, so to speak. And so defining and formalizing this for your students really goes a long way. Lastly, what I like about the Listenwise framework is they have broken down listening into 8 key components. They call these listening comprehension skills. And what I want to talk about next is using the students' listening data to drive instruction in the skill that they need to focus on. And so these are just definitions of the skills. I will say, Listenwise, they're a great company. They do a lot of research into the field. They've now teamed with a company called Metametrics. I think they're doing Lexile levels for listening, just like they have Lexile levels for reading. Really powerful stuff. So, especially like I talked about earlier, when you've given your kids 8, 10, 12 of these quizzes, you actually have a pretty robust profile on them and you know what their strengths and weaknesses are. So what I like to do is use that quiz data and then give the students some tasks during instruction time that help them shore up that weakness, whether it is a summarizing weakness, whether it's pinpointing evidence or POV, whatever that weakness is, I have the students think about it, reflect on it, and focus on it. And so this is a protocol that I've come up with where I'll give the students their data, and then the students actually focus on which one of these target skills, recognizing literal meaning, understanding vocabulary, making inferences, or identifying the main idea. And then I have them go through their quiz data and look at the questions they got wrong and figure out, why did I choose the wrong answer? This is a good spacing activity because you're doing it several weeks after they've listened to this. And so I just have my kids write a reflection on it. And then as I go through these reflections, I can see this student knows that he's listening for context clues. And they're getting a way to improve their inference skills. This person is focusing on understanding the vocabulary, right? And then this person is again focusing on understanding the vocabulary. So I've experimented with this. I've been vaguely happy with my results. Again, a lot of history teachers that are focused on sprinting through the standards aren't going to take the time and slow down for this. But I think the most important thing to do is tell your students how they can improve. And I see I've got, I'm actually supposed to stop now, right, and take questions. So I will say there's another article from EdWeek that's about listening research. I love these videos from Julian Treasure. What the research says. And then this is one of my big questions I always get from people: where can I find good history podcasts? And my friend Chris Hitchcock, who runs the social studies chat that happens every Monday on Twitter, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, she has a spreadsheet that I've linked to right here that has 250 different history podcasts. So if you need a shortcut to look for some good ones, they're all here. And that's it from me. Thank you for listening. I will now stop talking and take any questions.